So hey guys, today we're going to be talking about Kashtira Arise Art and why Kashtira Arise Art surprisingly sucks. So Arise Art seems pretty insane, right? But it's actually not that great. So we'll go through it. So once per turn, you can also XYZ summon Kashtira Arise Art by using one Kashtira monster you control. If an effect of Kashtira Shinra Era was successfully activated this turn, transfer its materials to this card. So this effect kind of nice, but also not even that powerful. And we'll get into that in a little bit. And then we have any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. So this effect, kind of mid, honestly. There are certain decks that get completely obliterated by macro effects, but we'll get more into this later. Once per chain, each time a card is banished, attach one banished card to this card as material. This effect actually kind of cracked. This is probably I would say one of my top two effects on Arise Art, I would argue. And then we have once per turn, quick effect, you can detach 3 materials from this card, then target one card on the field, bash it face down. And if we really break it down, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 effects on Arise Art, more or less. And also, both of these are not once per turn. Well, I mean, not hard once per turn. This one's not once per turn. This is once per chain. This is soft once per turn. But alright. Quick effect, you can detach 3 materials from this card, and you can consistently keep getting cards to be banished to trigger a Rise Art to kind of like keep being stocked up on materials, so you always have the banish, more or less. And then you have this effect as well, which doesn't matter too much. And then once per chain, each time a card is banished, attach one banish card to this card as material. So the macro effect, first off, is kind of just needed for Kashtira and also kind of awful at the same time. So first off, if we were to look at the meta at the time, you kind of had Snake Eye. So we have Subversion, which instantly clears the Rise Art. So if you hard open Subversion, that does it. And technically you can't activate Original Sinful under Rise Art, so we won't be including that. But then you have Snake Eye Ash, which can add Kurikara, Div Incarnate, and well, yeah, this wasn't actually limited before, so yeah. 3 copies of Snake Eye Ash. You know, you also had 3 copies of Poplar. And yeah, this is all stuff you can't do anything about with the Rise Art. Keep that in mind. So great. And then you have Bonfire, which can then add, well, this was also at 3, right? So this can also add Ash or Poplar. And already we're at 10 cards, so this is like 25% of your deck. Like not even doing the math for just opening these cards yet. 25% of your deck immediately stops the macro effect on a Rise Art. So this isn't even that reliable, is it? And then you have, well, every deck pretty much at all times more or less plays triple infinite impermanent. So we're at 13. So this is like more than 50% of your hands will have a way to more or less out Kashtira Rise Art. And you know, while we're at it, you know, we can do Snake Eye Ash to add Poplar instead of adding Kurikara. We can just also do that. And technically, if you were playing Kurikara, that would be like 14th card that outs a Rise Art. And that's not even including cards like Triple Tactics Talents, Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse. We're not taking into account like Raigeki or any of that yet, which I mean, you could technically also play. But you probably wouldn't, and you don't need to. But yeah. Snake Eye Ash, add Poplar. Poplar, add Subversion. Dark get a Rise Art. Done. Outed. And that's just it. That's gone, right? And then, you know, while we're at it, if we have just solo Rise Art, you know, if we do normal summon Snake Eye Ash to attempt to add Poplar, and then we just have any special summon of any other monster that you may or may not be able to do. At the time, I don't think you had anything you could special summon under macro with Snake Eye. But, you know, yeah, just let's assume you can summon something else. Then, in this case, maybe we can do, let's see, this guy, I suppose. This can just be special summon, right? Yeah. So let's assume you play 1 Birch. Not even that great, I guess, but you know. Normal summon Snake Eye Ash, we banish Snake Eye Ash, I guess, with Rise Art, not really much to banish here. and then link off, make SP, then we can now rise her like that. Or if you don't even want to make link Reba, you technically just make like Nightmare Service. And if this is in a main monster zone, that would be a way to destroy this. So yeah, a rise art, terrible. It just gets outed in a bajillion different ways. So yeah, it's already doing nothing. So you know what doesn't get outed by all these cards? Well, if you just, did an actual fissure or macro. We do fissure, macro, whichever one. A rise art gets outed by all those cards. You know what doesn't get outed by all these cards pretty much, right? Which is just a macro. And you know what's even better about macro than a rise art? If we can do like anything we want and then just flip over macro, right? We could go Isolde, do whatever, make unbreakable, but flip macro. And then like how do you add this, right? Versus like Isolde board with Charles or whatever, like several Charles, Link Charles, whatever, macro, cool. And then we have just Kashtira Rise Art, which also can be hand trapped, which we didn't even include. So that's an even larger amount of cards you have to deal with, right? Which, reminder, this, you can't really out it with any of the outs that work on Rise Art. And also, hand traps, they don't work, they don't do nothing. So yeah, macro, fissure, they're literally, like, in some aspects, just a better version of a Rise Art, just being a spell trap that, well, I guess they're the OGs for a reason, being macro. So this effect, not even necessarily that great because it's so pathetically easy to out. So yeah, moving on. Once per chain, each time a card is banished, attach one banished card to this card as material. This card with this effect. Now this is kind of brutal in the sense that they're actually decks that enjoy being banished, and they just don't work because a Rise Art will just suck all of your banished cards, making your deck not function. So yeah, and then this effect also allows you to do some things, which triggers your other Kashtira cards, which is pretty clutch effect in general, and gives you follow-up and stuff, which you wouldn't have had otherwise without this effect. So just with one of the lines, what we could do is, like, let's say we go Unicorn, grab Theosis, special summon Fenrir grabs Rise Art, banish, Big Bang, then we just make Rise Art from here. And then if any card gets banished, which they will because of a Rise Art's macro effect, we can then attach Big Bang, and then we can detach Rise Art, Unicorn, and then Big Bang, trigger Big Bang to special summon Fenrir. And then attach back Big Bang so we can do the same kind of thing next turn. And then we have Fenrir on the field also, which is more or less not that different from if you actually use the Shangri-Ira effect with the Rise Heart to then convert the Rise Heart into a Rise Heart. If you did this, the only thing that you would gain here is one extra Kashtira guy, being like a Unicorn or Ogre. Downside being, of course, that your Rise Heart is not activatable, being only one material. And that can be a pretty big downside when someone can do an inherent summon Zeus on you. So that would be like normal summon Max E, for example, and then special summon Blue, make rank 2, attack, downward Zeus, GG. Question mark. Well, I mean, since Typhon exists now, maybe not as much of a GG, but that can be pretty brutal, and none of your cards are actually activatable in this case, which is kind of terrible. And then while we're here, might as well throw this in here. Kashtira of Preparations, this card's honestly just like worthless without a Rise Art to an extent, or some kind of macro effect. During either player's turn, you can special summon one of your Kashtira monsters that is banished or in your hand. So in your hand would mean you would have to have searched it, so that would be like with a Fenrir, which is not that particularly useful because you could just summoned the monster that lets you search the other monsters. So you could then like Unicorn, grab Theosis, grab Fenrir, and then grab like Rise Art, and then you would do things from there, technically. And Rise Art can banish guy, and then Birth can special summon that guy, so there doesn't feel like there's that much of a place for Prep. But Prep can start gaining some mileage if we have a Rise Art, so we can like detach Fenrir, for example, that we used to make Eraser, and then we can special summon the Fenrir, and then also maybe the Unicorn with Big Bang, depending on like how things go exactly. But essentially, without that, the primary synergy in the deck with Prep is just Rysart banishing a guy that you can then special summon with Prep, and you can only special summon one guy this way because none of your cards are getting banished. So you unironically need like a macro or fissure type effect to actually activate preparation more or less to begin with. So that's pretty painful, one way or another. Kinda depressing even, one might argue. So yeah, that's kinda how that goes. And then with the Kashtira Eraser, this effect is essentially the only effect you have that's a quick effect. Everything else is a trigger. So the Zeus play that I mentioned before, the only way to stop it is that when your opponent makes the rank 2, we just Eraser banish it. But if we go through the Shangri-Ira line, it doesn't even add that much for you. Like if we just summon and have on board like Unicorn, Fenrir, Shangri-Ira plus Eraser, Shangri-Ira honestly not that useful. At most here, we're only going to be able to block 3 zones, which still allows for a Zeus play after activating like essentially everything, which is not great. So you have that, and then even with Shangri-Ira kind of cheating out Eraser, it doesn't actually cheat out Eraser because in terms of like the amount of level 7s you need to use, it's still 3 7s, more or less, right? So we go like Fenrir, Unicorn, Rysart. You still need all 3 on the field to do Shangri-Ira plus a Rysart, so that doesn't really get you anywhere further with this first effect, and in fact it's kind of worse in some situations, you know, because Nibiru is a card that exists, and this heavily plays into Nibiru, which just making a Rysart, it plays into it less. So this effect is mostly clutch on later turns, so turns like 2-3, where after activating Shangri-Ira, mostly I guess it would be turn 2 for your opponent, it can then go special any cash, make a Rysart, go battle, and then we can go Zeus, the board. And then with this, we have the option to go Shangri-Ira effect on turn 3. If this activates at all, then we can convert Ira into a Rysart, which can then also be converted into a Zeus for the clapback or whatever. So you have options, that is to say. And coincidentally, this also outs Typhon. And also, this Shangri-Ira play plays into Typhon as well, which is also kind of bad situationally, right? So yeah, not great, I would argue. And also, while we're here, you know, in terms of one card combos, like even if this was not the case, but I mean, I guess this is the case. We have 1 of Raids-Off, then 2 of Unicorn, and this more or less just ends on pretty much just the Rysart as far as I'm concerned, because all the other cards on your board don't really do that much situationally, or they would have been there regardless of which direction you went. You will pretty much always have the Fenrir, right? So in this case, yeah, Fenrir plus a Rysart is pretty much what you're ending on, and it can be hand trapped and all that, whereas Macro Fissure cannot be, so it's just worse. And also, there are less copies of like Unicorn and Raids-Off than you do Dimensional Fissure and Macro. And those types of effects in general, you have more access to these than you do to actual Kashtira cards, so somehow, yeah, it's worse. So if we break it down though, to just what Kashtira Rysart does for you, it's actually surprisingly little. If you were to make this without the Kashtira cards, all you would have is mostly this effect here. The effect to macro, it can kill certain decks right now, but if we look at the Sprite cards, for example, they're actually surprisingly not that bothered by a Rysart. So yeah, you can get really clapped out by Sprite. It's just not all decks would clap you out, I suppose. And also, you can't really make a Rise Heart this freely going second. So your going second ability is like above average because the Kashtira cards are just, they just happen to be kind of good. Like with Fenrir being a 2.4 guy, 2.4k guy, being able to beat over a lot of different things, and also you have the banish effect and all that. So that's kind of good-ish if you happen to open this and maybe perhaps your rate stuff does not get negated and you were able to search Fenrir. I mean, it's like situational, right? But yeah, you're mostly just not going to have a great time, I'd say. And Cash in general, it's carried by a Rise Heart, but not carried in a good way. It's just that all the other cards are unironically to an extent. If we look at the archetype by itself without a Rise Heart, the deck is just awful, bro. Like, it's ridiculous. And also Diablosis, while we're at it, Diablosis is basically probably the most toxic and the strongest part of this deck, being able to, without your opponent even interacting with you, like with Unicorn, it at least requires your opponent to interact, right? But with Diablosis, you'd be able to target one of your opponent's extra deck cards. And honestly, that's not the worst part of Diablosis. The part where it banishes like a ridiculous amount of your main deck cards face down. Yeah, that part's pretty bad. So it's like banish 20 cards or something of your cards face down. So yeah, that's awful. And then you have the zone lock after that, which honestly, after this point, after getting hit by the Diablosis stuff, honestly, not even that bad. So, you know, it would typically be something like bash your one of Zeus because Zeus was limited, and then summon, or not summon, but like trigger the effects of like Era, and then we can Diablosis all of your main deck cards away pretty much, and you have like no cards in main. You're out presumably to this board, like part of it would be banished from your extra. So you're really just suffering in that regard. Aside from that though, it's just like what does this deck even really do? It's just a bunch of cards that banish your cards face down. And also a macro, which you can deal with. If you open like Ash Blossom Joe Spring, that actually kind of works. I mean, you have to trade a little bit, which is not like necessarily the best, but imagine special summon Unicorn, add Theosis, negate Theosis with Ash Blossom Joe Spring, and then you know you're good. The only thing you have to deal with now is just the Kashtira Unicorn, right? And then whatever else your opponent has. And that's not really that bad, right? Could be same deal with Fenrir, you know, except you don't lose a part of your extra deck. So yeah, if you actually remove Kashtira Riser, this deck, it doesn't really do much. Yeah, like at all. Guy just kills Cash for no real reason, I would argue. And a Riser isn't even the only card that's kind of just a macro for your opponent. There are like several ways to do this. But one of the more splashable versions would be to activate a Hero Lives to summon Dark Mist, or Shadow Mist, whatever it's called, Elemental Hero Shadow Mist, I think it was, to then add Mass Change into Dark Law, and that's completely generic and splashable technically into like any deck really. And now your opponent is under a one-sided macro. So yeah, just a reminder that exists, and technically you can like fissure macro in any deck really. So let's say, you know, once again with the Infernoble example, we go make a Soul Day full combo, and then we activate a fissure, or we flip over the Macrocosmos on our opponent's turn. And that's something you can just entirely just do with no real restriction, right? Only thing is you would have to open macro would be the argument, but to make a Riser, you would just have to open Unicorn, right? It's like the same kind of thing, but arguably even better. Except the only difference between these two, you could argue to some extent, assuming the attach effect here doesn't matter, is macro sadly does not banish one of your opponent's cards face down. Sometimes, situationally. What a shame. So yeah, if we look at just removal, there are a lot of decks that just don't care about the specific forms of removal either as well. So something like, let's say DPE would be considerably better uh, than a Rise Art in certain situations. So for example, with DB, like this is kind of annoying to out, or like a Dragoon. These guys are much more annoying to out than a Rise Art, and they also have removal effects as well that affect you in a relatively annoying way, right? So with DB, if this is destroyed, so you would have to find a um, non-destruction way to remove the DB, but then again, the DB actually has the quick effect to destroy itself, which essentially allows you to dodge some effects as well. So let's say we have Mirror Jade versus DB. I can DB pop itself, and then your Mirror Jade cannot get rid of the Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. And then if you were to then trigger Mirror Jade's Destroy effect, doesn't really matter, because DPE will just be special summoned next turn from the graveyard with its own effect. And then there's also the fact of DP having this effect here, preventing you from really doing much to my DP with the Mirror Jade. So your only option is to destroy by battle if possible, really. And that would be assuming you're not playing actual hero. If you were playing actual hero, then you could not be beat over by the Mirror Jade. And it can technically match your other cards, but not the DPE. But you can somewhat easily out the Mirror Jade, so it becomes fairly annoying, right? Meanwhile, Kashtira Rise Art, you know, I'll just out it with like literally anything with like air, essentially, right? And yeah, that's done and dealt with, very much. Or like Dragoon, which is also a fairly large and in charge fella with 3k, and I don't know the defense points on Dragoon is probably like 2.5k or something. And then it's not targetable and it's not destructible, so non-target destruction wouldn't even work on Dragoon. So yeah, DPE could not out Dragoon, but on the flip side of things, you know, Dragoon can really out DP. It goes pretty even in that regard. I guess you can destroy by battle, and then technically negate the effect to return from the graveyard, technically, I guess. So in that case, you could kind of win. But, you know, it's all just situational, mostly. If you were playing actually heroes and you had enough heroes in the graveyard, you could also destroy DP by, or not DP, destroy the Dragoon by battle with DPE, technically. So there's that. And, you know, it's just much harder to out. You cannot imperm, you cannot subversion. There's like a lot of things you just can't do to Dragoon that you can do to Arise Art. But I mean, it also doesn't have a macro effect. So I mean, it all kind of balances out. But also, Arise Art, it's not as generic as the other two, where you can just make Verte and then special summon either or, right? You can summon the Dragoon, or you can summon BPE just by using 2 effect monsters with an asterisk, because technically, you know, sometimes monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of they kind of do a little bit of mitosis, and they just keep spamming out more bodies, starting with 1 body, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, you end up having ways to kind of make Verte, like, with ease, with just more or less 1 card, and still have some other stuff. So yeah, I think Arise Art genuinely not that bad, and like this card hasn't really done a lot either. Like honestly, it might be annoying for some decks to play against, but yeah. But what if you simply just win the coin flip against Kashtira, or like any macro deck? It's kind of like that vibe. But that applies to like pretty much every deck. Just going first is just kind of a really big advantage, so it doesn't really matter. In particular, if your opponent does summon the Rise Art, because, you know, it's actually not that bad to deal with. If you want a monster that's actually pretty bad to deal with, they're much worse than a Rise Art that you could be dealing with. Like, we have this. Gyrution. And we'll have to figure out this is spelled, but yeah. This guy is pretty gnarly. Just having a continuous floodgate effect preventing you from controlling more than one face-up non-water monster. And also having various annoying little things like stealth attack, and then you have the jellyfish, which can negate monster effects and spell effects. So yeah, I would say arguably this is much worse than Arise Art, but yeah, that's just me, I guess. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.